Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
Imagine this. You're finally in control of your life after years of dealing with a deadbeat ex, sipping coffee in your quiet office, when your phone buzzes with a voice that's pure terror, your new cleaning lady whispering that some guy's claiming to be your husband. And he's heading straight for your bedroom, turning your fresh start into a heart-pounding mess that pulls you right into the chaos until you can't look away, because that's exactly the nightmare that crashed into my ordinary Tuesday around noon when I had just finished showing a cozy three-bedroom ranch to a nervous first-time buyer couple in the leafy outskirts of suburban Chicago. The kind of place where families plant roots amid barbecue smells and school bus routes that promise stability after the upheavals of city living. And my phone vibrating insistently on the passenger seat as I slid into my SUV caught me off guard amid the paperwork shuffle and mental notes about staging tips for the next listing. Elena's name flashed on the screen, that dependable cleaning lady in her mid-50s whom I'd hired through a neighborhood app about 4 weeks earlier precisely because my real estate schedule left my own home resembling a whirlwind of unopened mail piles, coffee stains on the countertops from late-night contract reviews, and laundry baskets overflowing in corners where sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds, her initial visits already transforming the chaos into something resembling the organized haven I'd envisioned post-divorce when I reclaimed the space from memories of arguments echoing off walls that once held family photos now tucked away in attic boxes. She picked up on the second ring with her usual warm lilt, describing how she was midway through tackling the kitchen cabinets and sorting the mudroom clutter when a knock rattled the front door, evolving into this insistent pounding that made her pause with a sponge in hand, only to open it cautiously and face a tall man in his 40s with a confident stride and a voice smooth as polished oak insisting he was my husband who'd misplaced his key after a long drive from out of town. His words carrying that authoritative edge designed to disarm while his eyes scanned the entryway like he owned every inch of the hardwood floors I'd sanded and sealed myself during a weekend of therapeutic labor after signing the divorce papers 5 years prior in a sterile county clerk's office that reeked of stale coffee and finality. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as her description painted him vividly, broad shoulders filling the doorway in a worn leather jacket that evoked too many rainy evenings waiting up for him during our decade-long marriage filled with his sporadic construction jobs, weekend fishing trips that stretched into unexplained absences, and mounting credit card bills from indulgences he justified as stress relief, because Mark and I had severed ties cleanly, or so I'd thought after discovering his affair with a coworker whose perfume lingered on his collars like unspoken accusations, the settlement awarding me the house outright in exchange for forgiving the debts he'd accrued in our joint name. A hard-won victory that allowed me to pivot into real estate where closing deals on other people's dreams became my anchor against the loneliness of single life at 48 amid neighbors who nodded sympathetically at block parties but whispered about my fresh start over slices of homemade pie. I managed to utter a firm no through the lump in my throat, explaining he was my ex and had no right to enter, my voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline that blurred the road ahead as I merged onto the highway, but Elena's reply came hushed and quivering now, the background rustle suggesting she'd retreated toward the living room while advising me urgently to evacuate the premises immediately since he was shouldering past her protests toward the upstairs bedroom where my personal files and sentimental keepsakes resided in a locked drawer, his footsteps thudding with purpose on the stairs that creaked under weights heavier than the dust they'd accumulated since his departure. Panic clawed at my chest like an uninvited guest as I accelerated past familiar landmarks, the corner diner with its neon sign flickering promises of comfort food, the park where our daughter used to swing before heading off to college across the state. My mind reeling through possibilities of what he sought in that room, perhaps old documents to leverage against my rising property values or simply the thrill of intrusion to unsettle the independence I'd cultivated through yoga classes at the community center and book club nights dissecting thrillers that paled against this real intrusion. The line cut abruptly amid her gasp, leaving me alone with the hum of tires on asphalt, so I floored it homeward while redialing frantically only to hit voicemail, her automated greeting a stark contrast to the terror I'd just heard, and by the time I screeched into the driveway 20 minutes later, blue and red lights pulsed like erratic heartbeats across the manicured lawns of my quiet cul-de-sac, where minivans idled and curtain twitchers gathered on porches. Elena huddled on the steps with a blanket draped over her shoulders provided by the arriving officers who swarmed the perimeter with notepads and flashlights scanning for signs of forced entry. She recounted the sequence breathlessly to me, and the lead detective, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with a badge gleaming under the afternoon sun, detailing how he'd flashed a key that slipped uselessly in the lock, granting her precious seconds to dial 911 from the landline while barricading the bedroom door with a chair. His curses muffled but insistent as he realized the futility and fled through the back slider into the yard, vanishing over the fence toward the alley where garbage bins lined up like silent witnesses. The air inside carried a faint trace of his aftershave, that musky blend from his days as a site foreman which I'd once associated with homecomings but now evoked betrayal. And as the police dusted for prints on the doorknobs and questioned me about our history, the contentious split over infidelity and finances that left me rebuilding credit scores and self-esteem through therapy sessions paid from my first commission checks, I couldn't shake the violation settling like fog over the rooms I'd made my sanctuary, especially when a uniformed officer discovered the jammed key on the welcome mat, its fob engraved with initials that matched his from a long-forgotten anniversary gift. To reclaim a sliver of power amid the swirling uncertainty, I casually mentioned to the cluster of neighbors drawn by the spectacle how this was likely fallout from an overzealous ex who'd confused addresses in his nostalgia trip, weaving in anecdotes from our past about his forgetfulness with locks stirring heated spats. That painted him as harmlessly inept rather than threatening, a subtle narrative shift that had them murmuring sympathies toward me while seeds of doubt about his reliability took root in their group texts by sundown. My first taste of witty retaliation without escalating the official report. As dusk fell and Elena departed with assurances of her safety and an extra payment tucked into her palm for her composure under fire, I ventured upstairs alone to assess the bedroom, the air thicker with intrusion, only to find the drawer slightly ajar and a stray business card from his former employer's construction firm slipped beneath the pillow, its edges crisp as if recently printed, prompting a shiver of foresight about deeper motives tied to our shared financial ghosts. Securing the house with fresh bolts and an upgraded camera feed linked to my phone, I collapsed onto the couch with a mug of chamomile tea steaming in my hands, the day's adrenaline ebbing into wary reflection on how this breach reopened scars I'd thought healed through time and distance, but just as calm tentatively returned, my cell illuminated with a text from an unrecognized number stating simply that we needed to discuss matters urgently before things escalated further, plunging me back into a vortex of suspicion where every shadow in the house seemed to whisper unresolved secrets from a marriage I'd buried but apparently couldn't escape. That cryptic text from the unknown number glowed on my phone screen like a taunting ember in the dim living room as I bolted every lock and window that evening after the police finally cleared out, the metallic clicks echoing through the house as a reminder that my hard-earned sanctuary in this suburban Chicago enclave could unravel with one determined push from the shadows of a past I'd meticulously walled off with new paint jobs, therapy breakthroughs, and a thriving real estate career that let me advise clients on curb appeal while ignoring the cracks in my own foundation left by a decade of Mark's unreliable affections and financial sleights of hand during our marriage when he'd vanish for days on supposed business trips only to return with excuses as flimsy as the cheap motel receipts I later unearthed during the divorce proceedings that stripped him of access to the home we'd bought together in a fit of optimistic newlywed fervor amid the bustling energy of the city's outskirts. Settling into the kitchen with a generous pour of that bargain bin Cabernet whose tart bite always steadied my nerves after chaotic days like showing fixer-uppers to wide-eyed millennials or negotiating seller concessions over lukewarm conference calls, I fired up my laptop on the island countertop cluttered with listing flyers and a half-eaten granola bar from breakfast, diving into archived emails from our final years together that painted a timeline of escalating tension starting with his Unexplained bonuses vanishing into mystery accounts and culminating in the courtroom confrontation, where his lawyer tried to paint me as the villain for demanding full custody of our assets. A battle I won through sheer documentation, but at the cost of sleepless nights questioning my judgment and tying my future to a man whose charm masked a penchant for cutting corners like borrowing against the house equity without a whisper to fund his weekend poker games, with buddies who now circled him like vultures in his apparent downfall. Elena had reached out earlier via text to confirm she was holding up despite the ordeal. Her message, laced with quiet appreciation for the hazard pay I'd slipped her on the spot, which eased some of the guilt gnawing at me for inadvertently thrusting her into the crossfire of my unresolved marital debris. Especially since she'd shared snippets about her own life as a widowed mother juggling shifts at a local diner to cover tuition for her 2 sons navigating community college amid the economic squeezes that hit working families hardest in these post-recession years when gas prices fluctuate like moods and job security feels as solid as quicksand. The following morning, under a sky heavy with the promise of autumn rain that pattered against the coffee shop windows where we'd agreed to meet in the heart of downtown with its mix of trendy boutiques and hurried commuters clutching briefcases, I slid into the booth opposite her amid the aroma of fresh brews and cinnamon scones that masked the underlying bitterness of recounting yesterday's intrusion. Her hands wrapping around a foam cup as she elaborated on Mark's appearance with a precision born from years of observing neighborhood comings and goings in her line of work, noting his salt-flecked hair cropped short against the collar of that faded denim shirt. The faint scar above his eyebrow from a long-ago bar fight he'd romanticized during our dating days as a badge of rugged adventure, and the way his gaze darted past her into the house like a fox scouting a henhouse rather than a legitimate spouse seeking entry. We traded observations over refills, her wry observation about pushy men who assume doors swing wide on their ego alone drawing a reluctant chuckle from me as I countered with a light jab at how some folks treat marriage vows like expired coupons, cashing them in long after the fine print voids them, that touch of everyday vulgarity in our banter lightening the load without delving into the raw edges of fear that still lingered from her hushed warnings on the phone. And it fostered a budding alliance that made the vulnerability of sharing my space with a near stranger feel less like a gamble and more like a calculated step toward reclaiming control in a life where trust had become as selective as picking the right neighborhood for a family relocation. Energized by her insights and my own simmering resolve, I headed home midday to unearth a dusty storage bin from the attic stairs. Its contents a reluctant archive of our shared history that I'd preserved not for nostalgia, but as a bulwark against future claims during the asset division that left me with the property, but him with grudges whispered through common acquaintances at holiday gatherings where folks pretended civility over eggnog while sizing up who got the better end of the split. Rifling through faded snapshots of road trips to the Smoky Mountains where his arm draped casually over my shoulders hid the undercurrents of arguments about his late nights at the office that smelled suspiciously of another's laughter. I zeroed in on a cluster of images from that infamous Vegas getaway he'd pitched as a second honeymoon, but which hindsight revealed as the launchpad for his affair. The cheap plastic keychain dangling from his belt loop in one photo, catching the neon glow of the strip a dead ringer for the one Elena described jamming in my lock, its embossed casino logo a subtle clue tying his impulsive break-in to deeper designs, perhaps on liquidating remnants of our joint investments that had appreciated quietly under my stewardship since the divorce, when I funneled commissions into upgrades like the solar panels on the roof that now offset utility bills in this era of rising costs. That discovery ignited a spark of proactive defiance, prompting me to craft an innocuous online persona on social platforms as a distant cousin from his hometown who'd reconnected via genealogy sites. The profile seeded with innocuous posts about family reunions to lure him into accepting the request, and within a couple of hours, as I monitored from my home office surrounded by client contracts and a cooling cup of herbal tea, the connection clicked through to reveal his digital footprint scattered with check-ins at seedy motels along the interstate corridors leading back to Chicago, cryptic updates bemoaning life's unfair shakes at ex-partners who hoarded successes, and tagged photos with old cronies hinting at schemes for quick flips on undervalued properties that screamed he was circling my equity like a shark scenting blood in the water after his construction layoffs left him scraping for legitimacy. The thrill of this covert infiltration provided a satisfying counterpunch to his audacity. A digital sleight of hand that exposed his underbelly without direct confrontation and echoed the clever maneuvers I'd learned negotiating real estate deals where information asymmetry turns the tide, leaving me with leverage in the form of screenshots timestamped and filed away for potential escalation while a dry humor bubbled up at the irony of him posting about fresh starts from a profile picture taken in front of a pawn shop window. That slimy undercurrent of his opportunism now laid bare for my strategic perusal. Yet, as the afternoon waned into golden hour light slanting through the blinds and casting long shadows across the Persian rug I'd splurged on as a symbol of solo indulgence, my phone trilled with an incoming call from the office line. My assistant's voice tumbling out in a rush of flustered energy about an unscheduled visitor dominating the lobby with insistent questions about my availability, her description of a persistent male in a familiar jacket matching Mark's silhouette to AT. And when I ventured a glance at the security feed on my tablet, there he lounged against the reception counter flashing that trademark grin as if dropping by for coffee rather than reigniting a storm I'd barely weathered, freezing me in place with the dawning realization that his next move was unfolding right under my professional roof, poised to drag the uncertainty of our entangled histories into the very arena where I'd forged my independence. Spotting Mark sprawled casually against the reception desk in my real estate office lobby through the security feed on my tablet sent a jolt through me sharper than the first sip of scalding coffee on a rushed morning. His posture all feigned nonchalance as he bantered with my assistant about market trends and dream homes in the vein of someone who'd never pawned off family heirlooms to cover gambling debts during the lean months of our marriage when construction slowdowns left him pacing the kitchen like a caged animal, blaming everything from the weather to Wall Street for his empty pockets. That same disarming smile now aimed at gaining entry to the professional world I'd built brick by brick after the divorce through relentless networking events at chambers of commerce mixers and late evening study sessions poring over licensing exams that transformed my role from homemaker to deal closer in a field where women my age often face skepticism from sellers clinging to outdated notions of trust. I lingered in my office doorway for a beat, pulse racing beneath the crisp blouse I'd chosen for client meetings that day, debating between summoning the burly security guard from the building's main floor or stepping forward to neutralize the threat on my terms, because the last thing my budding reputation needed was a public dust-up splashed across the local business grapevine where whispers traveled faster than closing dates and could tank referrals from the conservative crowd who dominated suburban listings with their sprawling colonials and golf course views. Opting for composure laced with calculated steel, I approached the lobby with measured steps across the polished tile that echoed my resolve, murmuring to my assistant that this was an unexpected consultation as I guided Mark into an empty conference room lined with glossy property brochures and a whiteboard scarred from strategy sessions on pricing wars, the door latching behind us with a soft finality that isolated his familiar cologne-scented presence from the hum of ringing phones and shuffling papers outside, evoking those tense kitchen table talks from our early years when he'd promise fidelity over takeout dinners only to shatter it later with late-night calls I pretended not to hear. He wasted no time launching into his narrative, eyes locking onto mine with a practiced vulnerability that might have tugged at heartstrings a decade ago, but now registered as rehearsed theater honed from years of sweet-talking foremen and barmaids alike. Spinning a yarn about hitting Skid Row after the latest layoffs in the building trade swept through the Midwest like a relentless storm, leaving families in foreclosed shadows and him crashing on couches in basements cluttered with empty beer cans, confessing that word of my thriving agency through overlapping social circles had ignited this ill-advised outreach in hopes of tapping into lingering ties from our joint mortgage days for a modest bridge loan to stabilize his footing without dredging up the courts again in a system already clogged with tales of exes warring over scraps. I absorbed his words from the swivel chair opposite him at the glass-topped table, my fingers drumming subtly on a folder of comps for an upcoming appraisal, while my mind dissected the plea for authenticity. Recognizing the undercurrent of entitlement woven into his appeals, much like the times he guilted me into covering utility overages during our marriage by framing them as temporary setbacks in his grand provider role, a dynamic that had eroded my confidence until the affair's discovery prompted the split and my subsequent empowerment through solo vacations to coastal retreats where waves crashing against piers mirrored the washing away of doubts about my worth in a post-50 landscape where reinvention stories filled women's magazines promising yoga, retreats, and career pivots as antidotes to midlife malaise. When he veered into specifics about a supposed shared debt from an overlooked credit line tied to our old vacation fund, a detail that prickled with half-truths since I'd audited every account during the settlement to excise his fingerprints, I interjected calmly for clarity on the Vegas keychain mishap Elena had flagged, watching his expression flicker like a faulty bulb before he dismissed it as a sentimental trinket unearthed in his recent downsizing that coincidentally snagged during his impulsive door knock, yet the slip of her name in his recounting raised hackles because my hiring her through that vetted app hadn't intersected his orbit, or so I'd believed, planting a seed of orchestrated involvement that complicated the narrative of random desperation. Sensing the conversation teetering toward confrontation, I excused myself under the guise of fetching coffee from the break room, using the hallway privacy to dial Lisa, my steadfast college roommate who'd moonlighted as the voice of reason during my courtship with Mark Bai. Cautioning against his flashy car compensations for emotional voids, her response crackling through the speaker with urgent warnings gleaned from her HR perch at a logistics firm where industry gossip flowed like coffee refills, detailing fresh intel from his former crew about a pattern of preying on ex-flames with sob stories to extract funds for side hustles that veered into gray area loans from shady lenders, painting him not as a fallen everyman, but a calculated operator whose charm concealed a trail of bounced checks and broken trusts echoing the very red flags she'd waved during our sorority days amid keg parties and late-night philosophy debates on love's illusions. Bolstered by her insights yet wrestling with the disagreeable pull of nostalgia in a culture that romanticizes redemption arcs for wayward husbands in holiday movies and talk show segments, I re-entered the room and pivoted the dialogue toward a private off-site discussion that evening at a nondescript diner on the town's periphery known for its bottomless mugs and anonymity among truckers and shift workers, proposing it as a neutral ground to hash out details away from prying office eyes while inwardly cringing at the risk of isolating myself from potential witnesses in pursuit of a closure that felt more like masochistic curiosity than prudence. A choice bound of listeners furrowing brows at my apparent naivety in entertaining a wolf in sheep's clothing after years of self-help podcasts preaching boundaries as armor. As he departed with a nod of tentative optimism, his footsteps fading down the corridor, I couldn't suppress the urge for immediate reciprocity in this escalating dance, crafting an anonymous post in our shared alumni network forum alluding to it. Prodigal Pal's tall tales resurfacing with a vengeance, phrased in humorous barbs about forgotten debts and phantom keys that eluded without accusing, the upload sparking immediate likes and speculative comments from mutual contacts who'd attended our wedding reception with toasts to eternal bliss, a sly social sabotage that circulated his foibles like wildfire through group chats by the time I locked up for the day, deriving a wry satisfaction from the imagined deflation of his ego as replies piled up questioning his latest escapades. The afternoon blurred into a haze of virtual tours for out-of-state buyers and emails haggling over inspection contingencies, my focus splintering with anticipatory dread about the diner rendezvous where his full intentions might unfurl. The uncertainty coiling tighter like vines overtaking a neglected garden, and as twilight descended with streetlights flickering to life along the commute home past strip malls hawking discount deals on life's essentials, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Elena's number left hours earlier in a harried tone about rummaging through her cleaning kit for my spare house keys, misplaced in the post-incident frenzy, vowing to deliver them personally the next morning. But when I tried calling back amid the dinner rush preparations of thawing chicken in the microwave, The line rang endlessly into silence without pickup or text reply, leaving me staring at the device on my counter with a growing unease that her absence might signal more than mere oversight in this web of intrusions where keys to my home represented far more than metal and grooves. Elena's unanswered voicemail about the misplaced spare keys replayed in my mind like a looped track during the solitary dinner of reheated lasagna I'd thrown together from a foil tray bought at the grocery run that morning amid aisles stocked with family-sized deals on pasta sauces and frozen veggies that underscored the solitary rhythm of my post-divorce routine in this suburban haven where single women navigated evenings with podcasts on true crime cases that now felt eerily prescient after Mark's lobby ambush. The absence of her callback amplifying the unease that had settled in my gut like undigested worry as I cleared the dishes and scrolled through the alumni forum where my anonymous post had ignited a flurry of replies dissecting old acquaintances' questionable reinventions with emojis and inside jokes that thinly veiled the barbs aimed at his direction, deriving a fleeting amusement from the digital echo chamber turning his charm offensive into communal skepticism without me lifting a finger beyond the initial seed. Deciding against letting the night spiral into paranoia, I texted her a gentle nudge for an update while settling into the home office nook overlooking the backyard where fireflies danced in summer but now leaves swirled in the chill wind against the chain-link fence. The glow of the computer screen illuminating stacks of escrow documents for a pending sale on a lakeside property that promised clients the escape I craved from this intrusion, but which required my focus tomorrow amid back-to-back inspections and lender meetings that demanded the poise of a professional unburdened by ex-spousal specters lurking in voicemails and jammed locks. Sleep came fitfully on the guest room bed I'd converted to a safety net after the initial scare, the house's creaks amplified in the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic on the expressway that ferried commuters to the city each dawn. And morning brought no word from Elena despite my follow-up message, prompting a detour from the office routine to swing by her apartment complex on the east side of town where modest brick buildings clustered around a playground buzzing with early risers pushing strollers and sipping thermoses of coffee that steamed in the crisp air. Knocking on her door amid the scent of frying bacon wafting from neighboring units until she appeared disheveled in a robe, her explanation tumbling out in a rush about the keys surfacing in her vacuum canister during a late-night tidy-up of her own space, cluttered with textbooks for her night classes in accounting that she balanced against cleaning gigs to fund dreams deferred by life's curveballs like her husband's passing from a factory accident years back. Handing over the carrying with its cluster of duplicates for doors and cabinets that I'd labeled meticulously in a bid for order after Mark's haphazard habits left us locked out more times than I cared to count during family outings to amusement parks where he'd laugh off the delays with promises of ice cream treats. She hesitated in the threshold inviting me in for a quick tea. Her living room a testament to resilient homemaking with framed photos of her sons grinning at graduations and a corkboard pinned with bills and motivational quotes that resonated with my own scrapbook of affirmations from the divorce recovery group at the local YMCA where women swapped stories of reclaiming narratives hijacked by unreliable partners. Over steaming mugs of chamomile laced with honey from her pantry stocked with bulk buys from warehouse clubs, conversation veered to the diner meeting I'd alluded to vaguely. Her eyes widening with concern as she pieced together Mark's involvement from my guarded recounting, but then a framed snapshot on the side table caught my eye. Her arm linked with a man whose profile mirrored Mark's younger self from our dating era, complete with the same crooked smile and build honed from manual labor. Her quick deflection, claiming it an old coworker from the diner's days before she pivoted to cleaning, but the coincidence prickling like a thorn in this tapestry of supposed serendipity that now hinted at deeper entanglements perhaps forged in shared circles of economic hardship where favors traded hands like currency in the underbelly of middle-class survival. Back at the house mid-morning before heading to a property walkthrough in the affluent North End with its manicured estates and infinity pools that clients eyed for status symbols. The real escalation hit when I circled the driveway to find all four tires on my SUV deflated in neat slashes that spoke of deliberate malice rather than random vandalism. the rubber strips curling like defeated serpents under the overcast sky, while a neighbor walking her labradoodle paused to offer sympathetic clucks. About rising crime stats from the community newsletter that tallied such incidents alongside school fundraisers and bake sale announcements, the violation hitting harder than the initial break-in attempt because it stranded me in vulnerability amid a schedule packed with showings that couldn't wait for roadside assistance delays. Phoning Lisa for her no-holds-barred perspective as I waited for the tow truck's arrival with its flashing lights, mirroring the inner turmoil of debating police involvement versus handling this internally to avoid the stigma of domestic entanglements that could color client perceptions in a field reliant on trust and referrals from tight-knit networks. Her voice cut through with insistence on filing a report, but I countered with a plan brewing for subtler justice, retreating inside to craft a fabricated email chain on a throwaway account simulating a transfer of funds to our old joint savings number that I'd monitored dormant since the split, seeding it with details of an impending wire for house repairs to bait any monitoring he might have set up through shady tech contacts from his construction days when he'd boast about app hacks for job site tracking, circulating the bait via a spoofed reply-all to his known email pulled from the social media dive. The response came swift in the form of a confirmation ping from what traced to a virtual private network often used for evading oversight. His coded enthusiasm for checking the balance, providing the digital footprint I forwarded anonymously to a tip line for his former employer's ethics hotline, with context framing it as attempted fraud solicitation. A feint that promised repercussions in blacklisting him from industry bids while I savored the witty inversion of his predatory playbook into self-sabotage without direct accusation, the satisfaction akin to landing a tough negotiation where the opposing side folds under their own weight. Yet the day's reprieve shattered upon returning from the tire shop where mechanics grumbled about the precision cuts suggesting a utility blade from a pro's toolkit, entering the home to discover the front door sporting fresh gouges around the deadbolt as if tested repeatedly in my absence, the interior undisturbed at first glance, but a quick sweep revealing the office desk drawer ajar with papers shuffled though nothing overtly missing. The intrusion's subtlety amplifying the dread that this was no isolated grudge, but a methodical unraveling of my security threads woven through years of independence. As evening deepened with takeout Thai from the strip mall joint where spicy curries offered fleeting warmth against the chill seeping through window seals, my phone vibrated with a blocked caller leaving a terse message from a gravelly voice unknown claiming insider knowledge on Mark's maneuvers and proposing a discreet meet at the Riverside Park we'd frequented in happier times for picnics under willow trees that now loomed in memory as harbingers of revelations that could either fortify or fracture the fragile peace I'd clung to amid this cascade of dilemmas where every choice teetered on the edge of deeper entanglement. The gravelly voicemail from that blocked number echoed in my ears like a distant thunder rolling over the Chicago skyline as I debated the wisdom of heeding its summons to the Riverside Park the next afternoon. A spot etched into my memory from lazy Sundays during our early marriage when Mark would pack picnic baskets with sandwiches from the corner deli and we'd lounge under sprawling oaks watching joggers and dog walkers navigate the winding paths that hugged the water's edge. Those idyllic outings now tainted by the knowledge that his affections had always harbored hidden agendas, much like the way he'd skim extra tips from construction payouts to stash in personal accounts during the years when family budgets stretched thin over braces for our daughter and home repairs that he deferred until leaks turned into floods. Weighing the risks against the allure of potential closure in this tangled saga where each revelation peeled back layers of deception without fully exposing the core, I slipped a can of pepper spray into my crossbody bag alongside my keys and phone set to record audio discreetly, acknowledging inwardly that venturing alone to confront shadows from a past I'd outgrown through real estate triumphs and weekend hikes with new acquaintances from the local singles group contradicted the self-preservation mantras I'd absorbed from empowerment workshops at the community center, yet the pull of unraveling his motives proved irresistible in a narrative arc that mirrored those cautionary tales in women's fiction where protagonists teeter on the brink of enlightenment through perilous choices that challenge their hard-won autonomy. Arriving early under a canopy of gray clouds threatening rain that mirrored the storm brewing in my chest, I claimed a weathered bench facing the river where freighters chugged lazily toward the industrial docks. The air crisp with the scent of damp earth and distant diesel as I scanned the treeline for signs of the caller or Mark himself, my mind replaying Elena's evasive glance at that photo in her apartment and the forged email's success in rattling his professional prospects through anonymous channels that left him scrambling without a direct trail back to me. A clever maneuver that had provided a temporary balm against the slashed tires and tested locks, symbolizing his escalating attempts to reclaim leverage over the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of our dissolution. Footsteps crunching on fallen leaves announced Mark's approach before he emerged from the path, his frame slouched in defeat under a hoodie zipped against the chill. No trace of the confident intruder from days prior, but rather the weary opportunist whose eyes darted nervously as he sat at a cautious distance on the bench's far end. Launching immediately into a confessional torrent about his dire straits, deepened by the construction bust that shuttered his last gig and left him dodging eviction notices from landlords in the city's underbelly, where motels charged by the hour for thin-walled privacy. He wove a tale of regret laced with specifics about a tangled investment from our joint days, a supposed real estate venture he'd pursued on the side with borrowed funds from dubious sources now demanding repayment through aggressive tactics, like the home intrusion, meant to spook me into negotiation. Admitting the jammed key was a prop from his toolkit to feign legitimacy, while Elena served as an unwitting pawn he'd approached through a mutual acquaintance from her diner shifts, her initial reluctance overcome by promises of easy cash for a simple lookout role that she abandoned when the stakes turned sinister. A disclosure that aligned uneasily with her photo's implications and sent a ripple of vindication through me even as it underscored the disagreeable web of complicity I'd stumbled into by hiring her sight unseen in my haste for domestic order. Pressing him with questions sharpened by Lisa's warnings and my digital sleuthing, I cued the recording to capture his stumbles over details like the business card planted in my bedroom as a breadcrumb to provoke contact without outright threat. His narrative fracturing further when I referenced the tire slashes as crossing into criminal territory that no sob story could excuse. Watching his facade crack into pleas for mercy framed as a last-ditch bid for redemption in a society that peddles second chances through rehab ads and talk show makeovers yet overlooks the collateral damage on those left picking up the pieces. The air thickened with tension as he leaned forward proposing a modest settlement from my house equity to square his debts and vanish for good. His voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush about forged documents in his possession purporting to reinstate our marital claims on the property through overlooked clauses in the original deed. A bombshell scheme that aimed to leverage a sympathetic judge in small claims court for a payout that could bail him out while eroding the financial fortress I'd fortified with every commission check deposited into high-yield accounts since the split. In that charged moment, Elena materialized from the opposite trail, her approach hesitant but determined with a folder clutched under her arm. Revealing herself not as full accomplice, but as conflicted informant who'd feigned loyalty to gather evidence after her conscience rebelled against Mark's pressure tactics that echoed her late husband's manipulative debts. Her confession spilling out in measured tones about accepting his initial offer for her family's sake only to record their planning sessions on a hidden app when he escalated to suggestions of staging deeper intrusions. The documents in her hand, photocopies of his forgeries complete with timestamps linking them to his laptop IP from the motel check-ins I'd uncovered online. The partial truths cascading in those final, heart-pounding minutes crystallized the extent of his duplicity, a calculated assault on my stability born from envy of my progress in a field he once dismissed as women's work during our marriage when he'd belittle my part-time showings to prioritize his sight form and swagger. But before he could bolt or deny, I revealed the anonymous police tip I'd placed en route with coordinates for this very spot, sirens wailing faintly in the distance as backup arrived swiftly to cuff him amid his sputtering denials that twisted into accusations of entrapment. My sidestep from his frantic grab, a physical manifestation of the emotional distance I'd cultivated through therapy and trail runs along these same paths. As officers led him away under the now spitting rain that dotted the river like scattered regrets, Elena and I stood in the downpour exchanging nods of mutual relief laced with unspoken apologies for the tangled paths that crossed ours. Her admission of deeper remorse prompting a tentative offer to continue cleaning if trust could rebuild, but I demurred gently. The encounter leaving me with a hollow victory that questioned the finality of revenge in sealing old wounds when his parting glare hinted at unresolved resentments that might echo through legal appeals or chance encounters in this interconnected suburban sprawl. Walking back to my car with the folder secured and the recording uploaded to a secure cloud for any ensuing proceedings, the ambiguity settled over me like the receding storm clouds revealing slivers of blue sky. Pondering whether Mark's core held any redeemable spark buried under layers of self-interest, or if it was all artifice from the start, and what shadows of my own suppressed doubts about vulnerability in future relationships this ordeal might unearth. The thought-provoking haze ensuring that closure remained elusive in a life where every ending birthed new questions about the doors we lock and the ones we unwittingly leave ajar.